It's the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Thanks for being with us. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. Technical support is provided by CARTS, the Corporation for Automated Road Transportation Safety, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to safe and high-quality mobility for all. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alan Kornhauser. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Fred. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and we are happy to have with us New York Times reporter and author Cade Metz. Thanks for taking the time, Cade.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Cade covers driverless cars, artificial intelligence, robotics, and more. He's also the author of Genius Makers, the Mavericks Who Brought AI to Google, Facebook, and the World. We'll begin with a piece you wrote that's in print today. Can Tesla data help us understand car crashes? Give us the overview here, Cade.
Well, I think that this may be something that people in the industry are aware of, but maybe even there, some are not. In building these assisted driving systems along the lines of Tesla Autopilot, companies like Tesla collect vast amounts of data. This is video of what happens on the road, as well as all sorts of other detailed data describing the operation of the car. Sometimes this detail goes right down to the millisecond. How the steering wheel, the position of the steering wheel at any given moment, the speed of the car, whether or not something like autopilot is engaged or not. And Tesla, at least, collects a lot of this data in the event of a crash. And what this piece is about how this type of data can really change the way we think about crashes and understand crashes. It not only describes in sharp detail the way a Tesla has behaved in the event of a crash, but also in some ways, the way other cars on the road or even pedestrians and other objects on the road behave in that moment. Because you have this video of the crash scene in front of the car, behind the car, and we show this in detail with an example taken from a Tesla car.
We know from the airline industry, my goodness, if we didn't have black boxes in airplanes, they wouldn't be as safe as they are now. I'll go out on a limb and say that, okay? Simply because we learned so much from those things. And now to have the opportunity to have the sensors there and the opportunity to record the data at essentially almost no cost, and to then disseminate it and have it stored for, again, very little expense. My goodness. And maybe not even just with respect to the crashes, but what about near misses? What about that? What about, what happened when there wasn't a crash? What went well? What did we just miss? And all that, just treasure trove of data, right?
It makes sense if you're thinking about safety, right? But this is more complicated than it might seem. This data, for the most part, is something that Tesla keeps to itself. There are questions over who the data belongs to, and some have raised, privacy concerns if this data is shared indiscriminately, which is certainly a point worth making. So these are all sort of question marks hanging over this data. But when it comes to safety, it makes good sense to share it more than it has been in the past. And there are all these questions over how safe autopilot is and other similar systems that can be answered through this data. And at the moment, for the most part, it's the companies that collect the data that have access to it and are not sharing the insights with the rest of the industry, with regulators, and others trying to figure out what we need to do to make the road safer.
it would seem to me that the privacy issue is something that can be easily addressed. I mean, one doesn't really care who it is that's involved there or whose car it is. It's more about, the physics, what happened, what really happened, and to have the data being gathered and then being held tightly by a company and not shared. I mean, it just should be shared. Everybody should share it. We should be sharing safety data. We should be all working together on it because it helps everyone, right?
But at the same time, you don't want this indiscriminately shared with police departments without a warrant, right? I mean, this is the video data shows everything that's going on around the car, right? And there are potential concerns that that's showing everything that's going on on the road around the car. And you just want to think about those issues as you develop a framework for sharing this data. And that's what we need, right? There's not a framework in place for sharing this data. Not a lot of people are talking about the fact that this data even exists. It's unclear how much is collected, how long it's stored. Right now, it's pretty much governed by the agreement that the car owner has with the manufacturer. And there needs to be more of a framework that would allow companies like this to share this with researchers, police departments, insurance companies that can benefit from this data.
Policymakers, don't they need to know, what is really going on? I mean, we have redaction capability to video cam data from police officers and so on. I mean, one must have a plethora of ways to deal with this. And here, this is a trove of information that really will help everybody, correct?
Well,
I was going to say, is the argument against it from a company's point of view, a Tesla's point of view, that we've invested in all of this technology and we're going to be better than everybody else? It's ours, that kind of thing. Is that the argument?
Well, public companies operate in ways that put them in the best light, right? So a company like Tesla, is insistent that autopilot makes the road safer, makes their cars safer. They're only going to want to put out information that buttresses that claim. You put out this data, it shows both sides, right? It's going to show when the driver is at fault, when others on the road are at fault. It's also going to show, and you see this in the example we used in our piece, when autopilot is at fault as well. And public companies are reluctant to show when they're at fault, where the flaws are in the technology, and that's part of the larger problem with autopilot and some of these other systems. Is it Tesla is insistent that this makes the road safer. Meanwhile, there are all sorts of crashes. There are hundreds of crashes that this technology had been involved in over just the past year, and it's unclear what exactly is going on. Looking closely at this type of data can help. You're right, policymakers and so many others understand what the reality is.
We've been pleading here on this podcast for years for Tesla to release the data to an independent reviewer, you, me, whatever, somebody to take a look, so that in fact one has the opportunity to put the information out there on both sides. I would hope Tesla looks at the data and sees where they're lacking and uses that to try to improve their system. I can't imagine that they wouldn't. I mean, it would.
Well, that's pretty much why the data is collected, right? That this data can be used to modify and improve these systems in many, many different ways. That's why it's being collected. But you're right. For us outside the company, it's difficult to know what it actually shows.
Yeah, but to us, it seems like it's a no-brainer. Put it out to an independent group. You choose what the independent group, maybe two independent groups, whatever, to put it out there to basically have it peer reviewed. I mean, as we do in academia all the time, or at least we hope we do in academia all the time.
Right. I mean, this is needless to say, an important issue, right? The safety on the roads.
Yeah.
As we have this discussion, the safety of our roadways is not getting better; it's getting worse. And as the latest NHTSA data showed, latest data from the federal regulator shows, crashes are going up, not down, and it's unclear why this is happening. This type of data can help us deal with that problem. In our piece, a guy named Matt Wansley, who's a law professor in New York, and in the past worked for an autonomous car company, is calling for companies to collect this data and for regulations that require this data to be shared on a larger scale. Right? This isn't just a way of understanding how autopilot works. Mm-hmm. It's a way of understanding crashes writ large on the road, potentially, if the data can be collected and shared and analyzed.
Is the difference between Tesla? I'm sorry, Alan, go ahead.
The aspect of the safety is really one that, with the latest estimates out of NHTSA about the beginning of 2022, I mean, the numbers are really bad because things had been going down until when we first started reporting about 2012 was the bump year where it went up, I don't know, 5%, 10%. The rate per VMT was at 0.98 per whatever VMTs, and it went up to 1.04 or 05. I don't recall the number is. We are now at 1.27, whatever, deaths per vehicle miles traveled, whatever. That's almost a 30% increase in 10 years. When we've had supposedly technology being introduced into these vehicles, as Tesla would like to tell us, really improves things. We don't know whether it does or it doesn't, or the D and all that stuff, and we really wish we did. I mean, that is a non-trivial number. 30%,
7% just year over year from
this year over year, but you would hope that over 10 years there'd be some ups and downs, Brownian motion, whatever. But that's a non-trivial number per vehicle miles traveled, which seems to be somewhat of a basis in their different vehicle miles. And and we know that in fact, with COVID, or at least we think we know, people who knows, speeds probably went up, frustrations went up, misbehaviors probably went up. Who knows whether or not there's more of this or whatever, and all the other things that we can speculate about. But the behavior of us driving has gone in reverse. It's almost in 10 years.
What separates Tesla from the other automakers here? Why the focus on them? Is it the connectivity combined with the cameras and sensors, or what is it?
Well, they've been doing this longer, for one, and so they were, essentially the first to really make a play for this type of system and to get it on the road. And their ambitions are greater, right? They see this as a path towards autonomous driving, not just as an assisted driving system. They see this as a way of continuing to expand this technology and eventually get these cars to autonomy. And that does require a lot of data collection. You see this, for instance, through people who are testing what's called their FSD system, which is kind of the successor to autopilot, which can be used on city streets. There's a limited number of Tesla owners who are testing this system, and I've been talking to many of them. They go back home and their car connects to Wi-Fi, and there are just gigabytes and gigabytes of data that get downloaded from these cars overnight as Tesla looks to understand, how this is working, and then potentially, presumably, uses that data to improve and modify the system. Right? This data can be used in very pointed ways to improve the system. This is the way we do recognition of what's on the road. We use what are called neural networks, where you need lots and lots of data to train these types of systems to, for instance, see a pedestrian, to recognize other cars on the road and other objects on the road. This is the material that's needed to build those systems is data, real data from the road, and then all the statistical data alongside that video data can be used in other ways as well. So they're an ambitious company using the latest technology that requires the data, and they're willing to push the edge of the envelope, so to speak, in a way that some of the other car makers do not. A lot of the other car makers, although they might collect some of this data, they claim they don't ever send it over the air. Tesla does, not only in the event of crashes, but there can be other cases where they gather this data.
Another recent article that you wrote is headlined, Lyft unveils self-driving car service in Las Vegas, parenthesis, with caveats. The lead sentence, self-driving car services are popping up across the country, but they are not what they seem. Give us the insight here.
Right. I mean, it was a relatively small piece, but it was an effort to say, although multiple companies have announced what they call self-driving services, these are not services that can drive anywhere on their own without boundaries. In many cases, like this one that Lyft just announced, they still have safety drivers in the cars who are there to take over in the event that anything goes wrong. We still don't really have a service other than one in Arizona. And there as well, what people need to understand is that there are restrictions. There are caveats. If you've ever been to the suburbs of Phoenix, where that service is, the roads are enormously wide. Pedestrians are few. You're not going to get snow. It is geographically constrained, and that's one of the other ways these services need to be built. Meanwhile, there's this race amongst these companies to make it seem like they're putting these technologies out into the world. That's the way that they attract the talent they need to build these technologies. It's the way they need to attract the funding they need to build these services, right? But the reality is we're still waiting for even these geographically restricted services to really be available to a wider audience. For instance, me as a reporter, I cannot get into these cars without drivers yet. Whether it's Waymo or it's Cruise in San Francisco. I'm still waiting for the moment when they will allow somebody like me to spend a lot of time in these cars and really give people a firm idea of what they can and cannot do.
And you're saying this is going to be years, maybe decades before that comes.
Well, before it's pervasive, before it's commonplace, right? The way you have to do this now is you have to pick a particular geography, and you drive around with a car with a sensor, with multiple sensors on it. But the main sensor is a LiDAR sensor, a light sensor that can, essentially send light from the car, and it bounces off all its surroundings and it comes back. In that way, you can build a detailed three-dimensional map of a geography, a neighborhood in San Francisco, for instance. And the car then uses that to know exactly, what it's dealing with as it drives around San Francisco. Once you build that 3D map, these companies test for months and months and months to ensure that these systems are safe and that they can act reliably, at least in this limited geography. That takes a while. So what you're going to see is these services in particular areas will be available, but then these companies are going to have to go to a new area, a new city. They're going to have to map again. They're going to have to test again. They're still going to be restricted. They're still going to shut down when the weather is poor, when there's too much rain, for instance. When there's too much fog, they will stop operating. And so the dream of having a car that can drive anywhere on its own, that is still a long way off. There are going to be restrictions, whatever those restrictions might be. There are going to be restrictions for a while.
Well, what we like to argue here is that the car that I drive has restrictions on it too. That, I don't know, last winter, I think the governor of New Jersey at least twice or three times said, stay home, okay? There's too much snow out there. Wait until we get out there and shovel it before you go out. So I think, to me, the problem has been what I like most about your article is the failure to identify that there are really two markets here. There's a market, so we don't crash, and we do that. And then there's the other thing that's the one we're being driven around, and we're just, getting a ride for the mobility aspect. And,
right.
And they're two different things, because whenever I hop into United Airlines at Newark Airport, I don't go knocking on the door and say, hey, let me help you, pilot. I mean, I don't even know if there's a pilot there. Maybe there isn't.
Right.
I just go for the ride. And in some sense, that's the business there. And I guess we like to argue why, because we're trying to get these guys to come to New Jersey. Yes, it's okay if you have restrictions, do it for us for 350 days a year, not 365.25. My goodness, you do it for us for 350 days in the year when the weather's okay. We're going to be like happy campers. And maybe we don't want to go everywhere. Maybe you want to serve for people who, don't have very good alternatives. I mean, the one thing about people in Arizona, how many cars does each person have? I mean, they have more. You don't move there unless you bring cars with you. I mean, whereas in places like Trenton, Newark, Camden, a lot of places in Jersey, boy, they don't have a car, and they can't get to. I mean, the alternative is to walk. So we think we have a market here for this, and maybe let's not try to do it for everybody yet. It'd be great if we could be Frank Sinatra of this thing. We do it, in Arizona, we can do it everywhere. I don't think if you do it in Arizona, you can do it everywhere. So it's not even a good place to start.
Right.
And don't even try Manhattan, please. I mean, don't you want to be crazy? Don't even do Brooklyn. I mean, I don't know how we can, put some sense into this thing. But why don't we look at where there's a market for the mobility piece, and then try to serve that market at least somewhat better than the way that it's currently served, and that way get our feet on underneath it. What do you think?
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons these companies are in San Francisco, right? There's more of a market there. People
right.
use taxi, ride-hailing services in
Right.
ways they don't in Arizona. And you're right, there's nothing wrong with restrictions, but let's talk about them, right?
Yeah.
Let's reset expectations. The fact of the matter is, this is a really, really hard thing to do. And,
Yes.
And when it comes to, this goes back to what we were talking about before, policymakers need information to figure out how to govern these services. And, as it stands, the expectations are still out of whack. And I had a moment last week. I was in one of the Waymo cars in San Francisco. And again, they will not let me in the cars without a driver. So there's still a safety driver. And, you get a reporter in there, it's a particular route. They don't want anything to go wrong. So we're on this route, and I'm chatting with one of the Waymo employees, and we're heading down the street, and there's a traffic cop, okay, who is in the middle of the road directing traffic. Now, and Waymo will tell you we are now able to deal with traffic cops. When they're waving you through, we can recognize that. Well, we get to this traffic cop, and the traffic cop is waving us through, and the car stops, right? And the traffic cop waves more and more vehemently, and the car doesn't go anywhere. And eventually, the safety driver has to disengage and go forward. It didn't recognize what the cop was trying to tell us, right? That's just one example, of the type of thing that you and I can deal with just by second nature, right? We see the wave of that hand, we know what that means. It's very easy to say, we have built technology that can deal with that, but actually getting it to work is a hard thing. Taking these AI models and deploying them in the real world, we've made tremendous progress. And you see that with these cars. But these little edge cases like that, as they call them in the industry, are really hard to deal with.
Right. And I sort of, when my students point out stuff like that, I sort of tell them, well, okay, maybe the first car doesn't go through there, but of course the information is sent back to the command of the fleet managers, and they now know that intersection has a traffic cop. So now the routing to wherever you were going should go around that, and go to places where there aren't traffic cops, if that's what's the holdup. There's a lot of discussion about how poorly these things will work in work zones and so on. And my goodness, avoid the work zone. Okay, in a sense, they're trying to make this thing perfect for everything. When you say it's going to be, generations, I forgot exactly your quote in the article as to when they're going to be largely, it's going to be a very long time. And you look at how long it got us to be able to drive a car, even, easily across the country. It took more than 50 years from 1887 to whatever. So relax a little. Let's try to get these things useful in some places to provide mobility for people who really need it, at least some of the time, and do some value, as opposed to it just being a nice selfie or a joyride or an amusement ride. I mean, the objective of the driverless to me is to provide improved mobility. In other words, when somebody looks at the ways they can get from places, they need to, it's better in these markets. And I just don't think that they've done a very good job at doing that. Okay, I think the places where I also made the comment with respect to GM crews only operating at night, between midnight and 5 or whatever their hours are. I thought that was brilliant for them to do that. Why? Because Mooney's not running. So if you really need to go from A to B and you don't have a car, guess what? You can't call up a bus or call up the whatever and say, hey, turn it on. You can have one of these things take you, because it's operating then. So in fact, the operating at that time of day, time of night, is actually an enormously valuable societal thing that they're delivering to San Francisco, and not something that they should think they make an excuse for doing it because it's easier or something. I'd flip it. I'd say, my goodness, yeah, you're actually providing some public good out of this thing that otherwise somebody would have to walk or get a neighbor out of bed or whatever.
Your point is taken. Your point is taken, but the fact of the matter is that the average person in San Francisco can't use it at this point, right? It's unclear how many people are actually using the service, have access to it. So you're right, in the long term, but in the short term, one of the reasons, if not the main reason, they're doing that is because it is easier,
I know.
And you get, but that makes sense too, right? You start in these limited situations when it's safer and you get comfortable, and then you expand and you prove that you can do it in a little bit more complicated situation, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think I crawled before I ran. Now I'm back to walking pretty soon. I'll be back to crawling. Whatever. What can we do here? But it is really, really interesting with respect to all of that. your article with respect to Vegas sort of also implied, my goodness, it is going to take a while for all this. I mean, what do you see as the major motivators that get this thing moving a little bit stronger, faster? I mean, we've been waiting around a while on this thing, haven't we? We've been talking about this for a while. Do you have any suggestions on those things?
Well, I mean, again, it is such a hard thing to do, and I think that is what people still don't realize. This is not like building a smartphone app and putting it on the Play Store and distributing it, right? This is extremely difficult, especially when you consider that lives are at stake. What would seem simple to you or I when it comes to driving down the road, it's very difficult to get machines to do that. And even if you're able to do it, then the question becomes, can you really make build a viable business around the technology? What's also clear, and that these companies weren't necessarily open about before, is that as you deploy these services, you need people, and you alluded to this, back in a data center overseeing everything, right? There are going to be cases where the car gets into a situation it can't deal with, and it's going to need help from a remote operator, okay? And so you've got to hire people who are going to respond when the car needs help, right? That's part of these services as well. In addition to the hardware that's on these cars, the Waymo cars have 29 different sensors on the car, right? And LiDAR, for instance, is not cheap. It's getting cheaper, but it's not cheap. So these cars are expensive. The labor, people don't think about it. You need the labor on the back end in the data center, ready to respond when these cars get into trouble, right? You've got to pay those people. And as it stands, ride hailing is a business with small margins, and there's all this stuff that needs to be worked out. But at the front of it all is that building this technology is hard, and ensuring that it's safe is hard, and that should be the primary focus, right? And it is for most of these companies.
That is, and kudos to Waymo and GM Cruise for essentially biting the bullet and putting them out there without drivers in at least Arizona and San Francisco some of the time under the constraint. I mean, can you imagine sitting in the board meeting or whatever, trying to say, hey, do we pull the driver? I mean, that's like betting the ranch that the thing's going to work, because as we know, the one Elaine Herzberg crash of Uber, I mean, decimated their fundamental interests at trying to do Uber driverlessly, and ended up, we know what the results of that was, and that's one crash. And so you can imagine the people around the table at that time saying, hey yo, and to decide to do it. So there's just an enormous activation energy that you need, or knowledge that you really are safe, because if it turns a little against you, and Mother Nature is really tough on these things, you're in trouble, right?
Absolutely.
There's another piece also in the newsletter, Alan, and another article from the Times titled "Driverless Cars Shouldn't Be a Race." And that's from the Times. That wasn't one that you wrote. You may have had some input. I don't know.
That is from our tech newsletter writer, Shira Obade, and I'm quoted in the piece.
Yes.
And she makes a good point, right? And I alluded to this earlier. This is, in a weird way, a race, right? And it's what it is really. It's a race for engineering talent and a race for funds. This, like I said, this problem is really difficult to solve, and in order to solve it, you need tremendous amounts of talent and money. And so that's what's going on here. And that's why these companies make these claims. And that's why they're determined to get these services out first. And they need help from regulators, right? The regulators have to allow these services on the road. So part of what goes on is, we've got to beat, the Chinese to the streets. I mean, ultimately, what does it matter if China has a self-driving service before we do? It doesn't really, but that's part of the way you get, the government's motivated here to allow these things on the road is make these claims. And what Shira was saying is that it shouldn't be that way, right? The primary focus should be, let's get this ready, and as you said, let's make sure it's safe, and then put it in situations where it can be useful, where people need it. That should be the aim. But in order to do that, you need money, you need talent, and that's the way you attract it. Is you make these outrageous claims, and you turn it into a race.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it has been a race. We should all be cooperating in it, simply because there's so much fundamental societal value associated with it. Whether it's to help us drive more safely so fewer of us die or fewer of us get maimed and whatever, on the driving side. And then on the other side, the mobility piece, especially for a substantial portion of our population, that doesn't have access to employment, that they can't even go to a reasonable grocery store. That's not there is local mobility challenges. Maybe it's just Jersey, maybe it's just Trenton and Camden, and I doubt it. I think it's all these communities where there's so much societal benefit potential out of this, that we really need to continue on and continue to make this. And maybe we don't do it when there's fog. We're not trying to solve the fog problem. We're not trying to solve the snow problem. We're not trying to solve the hurricane problem. But what about, the rest? Maybe we can do a lot without doing everything.
We will be back, but this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, head to motoetf.com. On the website, look for a white paper. It's called The Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under the Insights and News tab. Some great information there to help you make informed decisions about investing. ETFs, you probably know, can be a smart way to spread risk with investments, maybe focus on a particular category of stocks. That website again is motoetf.com. We are back with more of Smart Driving Cars and our guest, New York Times reporter and author Cade Metz. Some other headlines to get to. Elon Musk says Tesla is upping the price of full self-driving in North America to $15,000 as of September 5th. I guess one of the goals is to get you to buy now. So that's a $3,000 increase.
I thought he called it FSD. I don't think did he actually say full self-driving? Is he still saying that? I don't know.
I quoted the Bloomberg story.
Hey, if he thinks he can get 15 grand for it, look, somebody, at least he's, I don't know. We'll see what the market does. Whatever. Right?
Surprise at this time, Cade?
This has been going on for years, right? He's had this service, and it is called full self-driving. That is what it is called on the Tesla website. I've written about this in the past. There are people who have bought this assuming that that's what they were getting, right? A car that could drive on its own. And that's not the case. They do have this technology that is designed to drive the car on its own on city streets. But this is and has been for years now, a beta test technology. Initially, it was only available to a small number of people. Even if you paid $10,000, $12,000 for FSD, if you paid that money, you didn't necessarily get this beta, and you were paying that money for basically nothing beyond autopilot, but nothing even close to what you might think of as full self-driving. Even the beta is not full self-driving, right? I've been in these cars with the beta just like with autopilot, you have to keep your hands on the wheel and stay alert at all times, and even more so than with autopilot. It's the same situation that all other companies face. You can build a self-driving car that does a lot of impressive things, but every once in a while it's going to make a mistake. Every once in a while it's going to get into a situation that it can't deal with, and you better have your hands on the wheel and be ready to take over.
Is it enough for Tesla to be telling people that, look, in writing here, it says you have to be paying attention all of the time, even if they're calling it full self-driving?
That's the debate, right? Is that you're right. Legally, they say you have to keep your hands on the wheel and you have to stay alert. And that means when things go wrong, they stand back and they say, hey, we told you not to do this. But the concern with a lot of people is that, especially as people get more and more comfortable with technology, that they let their guard down, and then those edge cases come up and they're not prepared to deal with it. On top of that, you have situations where it's not just about the technology not dealing with a particular situation. There are cases where it actively malfunctions, right? A lot has been written about what's called phantom braking with Tesla and autopilot, and that's when it just suddenly brakes in ways that are unexpected. It mistakenly sees something in the road, or it sees something on the side of the road and it assumes it's in the road, and will decelerate in ways that the people behind you might not expect, right? I mean, it's a complicated, it's a complicated situation, as we've discussed here. And a lot of people are concerned that despite this sort of system that Tesla has in place that protects it, that the company is not protecting the owners of the car, the drivers of the car, as much as it should.
I don't know. I must run around, a whole different set of people than what's normal out there. But sort of everyone that I think that I know, and every time I've been one of these things, I'm almost ready to change my underwear because you can't. And I know that even when I drive, I misread some things and I hit brakes when probably I shouldn't hit brakes. And I think there's something coming and I jerk. And of course, and so to me, driving is a very scary process. I mean, I'm amazed I've gotten to be this old because, through most of my life, the highest probability of death was death by auto, and I don't know whether it still is because I'm so old, but, what is it from the age of I don't know, 15 or something through 40 some, somebody can look it up, but, the highest probability of death for an individual is death by auto. And riding around and driving, I know it's supposed to be nice and easy going down the 405 or whatever, or the equivalent to 101 where you are, or wherever, or the Jersey Turnpike or Route 1. But I don't know. It is, to me, it's enormously straining, and my goodness, to just think, let the computer do it in those situations. What bothers me also a lot about it is that to have these systems allow you to come on at any speed. I know there now is a speed restrictions on Teslas and so on, but there should be speed restrictions on this. I mean, you really need to do more than 9 over. Maybe we'll give you 14. I don't know, but all this other stuff that seems to be going on out the road is like crazy stuff, and should you just, be switching lanes? I don't know. I mean, it's
Alan, you highlighted
death when I'm out there. That's just where I stand. Maybe I'm just a whatever. I don't know.
Cade, any comment on that?
Well, I mean, I think you're showing why this situation is not necessarily what it seems. I mean, I think if you step back from this, what you need is a system that that will keep you safe, right?
Yeah, that's what I want.
Okay. Do we need a system that requires you to be more diligent, right? Do you need a system that can put you in situations that are potentially more dangerous? Why use this model where you're putting this system out there that's called full self-driving, that is supposed to take you anywhere and reduce your stress, when in fact it does the opposite? Why does that need to be on the road now? Why turn the car owners into testers? Why charge them this much money, for something where they actually have to be more diligent, rather than less? These are all open questions. One thing where you're right is this is very different. They're saying we're going to ensure this is safe. Once it is safe, we're going to let people use it. Tesla is the opposite, right? We're going to put this out on the road, and we're going to continue to improve it while it's on the road. And the owners of the car are the testers, not our private employees. It's a very different situation.
Alan,
they probably deserve to be paid. In other words, maybe Tesla should be paying people $15,000 if they go out and are testing FSD. Maybe that's the way it should be, right?
You can make that argument.
I can make
Clearly, there are a lot of people who are willing to pay the money for FSD.
It looks like that's the way it is, but if you go back, hey, I'm an academic. You go back and look at economics. It should be what? Never mind. Go ahead.
Alan, along these lines, you highlight a piece from Electrek, and they've got their AI day at the end of next month. Tesla has released a new picture of its upgraded supercomputer, one of the best in the world. And I know last year at AI day, you were pretty taken by what Musk had to say.
Yeah, I'm impressed at the hardware they put together to try to do the neural networks and so on that Cade was talking about. And those are very, very challenging mathematical and problems. And I guess, my simplistic answer is instead of trying to get FSD or whatever you want to call it to work everywhere, hey, get it to work on the operational design domain of Trenton. And provide some mobility, provide 15,000 or 30,000 person trips a day to people who could really improve their lives and so on, and just do it in the small. And I think you can go collect the data in it that you're trying to get to work everywhere and just get them to work in Trenton and do that for a while and get that done. And not then say, hey, the car then has to go to San Francisco and also work. I mean, the cars that would provide mobility in a Trenton or in a Newark or in a Camden or in a Perth Amboy really stay within that area. One isn't. If you want to go to New York, we'll take you to the train station. You can take the New Jersey Transit to Manhattan. We don't want these things going into Manhattan. It's like silly. Are you kidding me? And so, let's start there. And I'd love to get access to Dojo. And it's wonderful. I think I applaud him for putting together the analytical tools behind it to try to do it. Trying to do it everywhere, is more than trying to get to Mars, I think. But that's only my personal opinion. I mean, it's tough.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, as we discussed at length here, you need to restrict the problem. But I think there's one misconception here. The dream, okay, and this is the way Musk talks about it, is that you collect enough data describing everything that goes on our roads, and you feed that into one neural network, and the neural network learns to drive, right? It does not work that way today, right? We don't have as much data as we have. We don't have a neural network, that can take in all that data and learn everything and then drive. It does not work that way. What you have are many, many smaller AI models that do particular things. You have one that recognizes stop signs. You'll have another that recognizes pedestrians. You'll have another that tries to deal, with prediction, or another that tries to deal with planning. But all these things have to be put together, and it's not like we're just taking all this data and throwing it on one neural network, and then you come out the other end and the car drives and it does everything perfectly. That's not the way it works. And Musk, talks about it as if it does work that way, and it doesn't. You build a new version of the software, you take some data, you update one AI model, you update another, you have to put them all, all back together and test them again. And that's the process, right? This isn't magic. As much as people in the industry talk about it as if it's magic, it's just not.
Yeah, all those things need to be done, but to do it maybe in a little bit local area. Sort of the argument we make around here is that in a sense, you want the attendant on board when you're doing all this stuff, because we know it's not going to work. But the reason for the attendant is not to get the software to work, is to get the people acclimated to this system. I mean, the one thing that I think they're trying to do in Arizona and San Francisco and in Las Vegas and Austin is to try to get the people acclimated to these things. We use the elevator analogy all the time here. I mean, if you're sitting in before 1945 or something like that, where there's an elevator operator in each elevator, and then all of a sudden there's no elevator operator, because there's an elevator strike, and the people are already somewhat acclimated to the elevator and say, what the heck, I'm not taking the steps. The alternative is so bad compared to this newfangled way to get places, like up in a building, that sure will do it. And in some sense, to me, that's the same reason you need to get people comfortable with this thing. And sure, if they can relate to the elevator and say, hey, I'm comfortable in an elevator, this should be easy, not suggesting that it operates in tubes, but to me, I still think that an algorithm is probably as good as a cable or flange wheels. When you get, elevators still have crashes. People do still die in elevators. Not very many, but
Right.
still have. Nothing's perfectly safe. And of course, that shouldn't be the objective here. Because if it is, then we definitely just give up. We're not going to get we're not going to get there. I'm sorry.
And it's not just the comfort level of the people inside the vehicles, Alan. The San Francisco Examiner has a report, headline, "Did driverless cruise cars have been involved in 9 hit and run accidents?" And this is when drivers in other vehicles leave the scene because they see there's no driver.
If I hit when there's no driver, I don't know. Sorry. It seems like a natural response. There's nobody hold you accountable, and I just dented it. Nobody saw that one. I don't want. Not surprising at all. And it's part of what happens. Hey, guess what? These, as we've been talking about with Tesla, these things have so many sensors on there. They have the data to say, hey, yo, we see you. You ran away, but if it's really important, we can go find you. But anyway, that's not surprising at all.
Well, Cade, we want to thank you for spending time with us. We really appreciate all of your insights and the great work that you're doing.
Yeah,
Really enjoyed it.
And finally, Alan, saying goodbye to Pete Carril, who coached Princeton men's basketball for 29 years. He changed so many lives and changed the game. And joining us is one of Princeton's all-time great basketball players, former ABA and NBA great too, Brian Taylor. Hi, Brian.
Hey, Fred, how are you today, buddy?
hey, Brian, thanks for pulling over and
Hi, Professor.
and turning in with us. Your thoughts on this? have so much love for the individual and what he did, not only for Princeton, but for basketball and the world. Your comments.
And of course, what he did for me.
Yeah.
I'm very saddened by the loss. Lived a good life, 92, but you figure that's, a long life for a great individual, but you still, it's very saddened. He lived to be 92, but you're never prepared to lose someone that you love. And so many memories, Professor, that come to my mind about Coach. And of course, they're asking me to write about it. And I would just like to share a couple of things that I said about Coach. And Fred would probably remember this because he was there when Coach Carril used to come around to watch me play. And all the guys used to say, "Is that Columbo here to see you? Is he trying to get you to be on his next show?" I don't know if you remember that one, Fred, but he would always be there. He would always appear. And I can't remember exactly the day and time that I met Coach, but boy, it was memorable. And I was so excited when he was interested in me. And I remember it like yesterday when he called me up and said he got me into Princeton. And I got chills when I heard that because I really wanted to not only go to Princeton to get a great education, but I also wanted to be under his tutelage. And what I remember about him, Professor and Fred, is that he was a true critic. He never told me how great I was. He always told me the stuff that I needed to work on in order to be great. And in his eyes, I never really got to that point where he was a perfectionist. And all his ex-players would tell you that he was such a perfectionist that you had to be prepared to hear it. You had to be prepared to hear it from the perfectionist, which I loved playing for Coach. And, when I left in 70, wow, it's going way back. When I left in 72 to accept a great offer from the New York Nets, I said some things that people misconstrued that I was criticizing Coach Carril for. But that could mean anything further from the truth that I would be critical of Coach because I loved him. I loved what he did for me. I loved what he did for the guys that were there before me and after. So I'm very saddened by the loss of a great man and, of course, a great coach to me. And it's a father figure, really. It was a great father figure for us. I don't know whether it tells you how bad social life was back in the day because we were always over at his place hanging out, Professor. We were always over there able to get a burger and some trimmings at Coach's house.
Brian, you were telling me previously, in full disclosure, you and I were high school classmates. What you were telling me was that a lot of players before the coach passed away were in the process of putting their stories together to give to him.
Yes, I think not only to give to him, but for his legacy to be forever from the players that spent the time with him and that played for him and that loved him. And there's those who didn't love him. I'm sure they didn't ask the guys that didn't love him to write a chapter or so or essay about him. But yeah, there's probably about 60, 70 guys who put together something in writing. And I'm not sure whether the coach was able to read what I sent in. Hopefully he did, because it was all love. It was all love and the great memories I had for him. So there's probably a 100-page book being put together right now for a coach's legacy.
And there's also been a lot of talk about how much he changed the game of basketball at the pro level as well as collegiate.
Yes, and what's really interesting about that is that the individual that gave him the opportunity to have an impact at the NBA level was the great Jeff Petrie. And it's funny, I was reading, I don't want to share everything that's into the book that will be published shortly. It was one individual who was talking about how Jeff and Coach didn't get along Especially Jeff's senior year. Jeff was hurt. He came in with he got a back injury, and that was difficult for the coach to stomach. And so one of the individuals that played with him was talking about how they didn't get along, but believe it or not, they reconciled because coach accepted the offer that Jeff gave him to coach with the Sacramento Kings. And I think he had a great run for 10 plus years with the Sacramento Kings with his former great player, Jeff Petrie.
Yeah, but it's not only the contribution to basketball, but it's also the contribution to your life and the life of so many others who played for them, for him, in terms of doing great things beyond basketball. Not only doing great things in basketball, but beyond basketball, and that's really the great contribution of a great teacher, which he was.
No doubt. And my memories of him, I thought he was just telling me this, but he told me, don't go into coaching. And I was reading, it was really interesting. I was reading some of the articles and some of the essays that some of the guys have written. And he was telling that to everybody because he thought they were greater than just basketball. Not that basketball isn't great. Yeah. But he always felt that if you go into Princeton for this great education, change the world some way and somehow. And that was his message to me. He says, Brian, just don't settle just to do stuff in basketball. Do something that's going to change the world. And for me, it was getting involved in education and hopefully being able to change the lives of young people. And that's something that he always inspired me to do. And I love him for it, not just for what he did for me basketball wise, but as a young man who was such a great role model, such a great mentor. And it's off the court that his memories will be he'll be long remembered for the messages that he gave to his players and his friends away from basketball.
Yep, true greatness.
On the court and off the court, Coach Carril, I just, like I said, I'm very saddened by his loss. A lot of memories. One of my last memories of him was he asked me to coach with him. When he was with Sacramento, he had an opportunity to coach a young Chinese team that was trying to play in the NBA G League, and they wanted to learn the Princeton offense. And so he called me up and he says, Brian, if you have some time, I'd love for you to come and be my assistant as I teach these young Chinese players to learn how to play basketball the way that you did when you were at Princeton. I said, yeah, of course, coach. And the story goes, about a month later, we spent a month, we had an interpreter, and coach comes to me and says, well, Brian, I think you're ready. I said, ready for what, coach? He says, the team's all yours. I said, what do you mean the team's all mine? It's just, I have to go to training camp. Training camp starts in a couple of days, and you're ready to take this over. But I want you to be careful about the owner of this Chinese team. I think he says, just be careful of him, right? And so I said, all right, coach, if you believe I'm ready to coach this Chinese team to play in the G League, I have faith that you have faith in me. He said, oh, I forgot to tell you one other thing. He says, the owner is also removing the interpreter. I'm like, what? I have to coach this Chinese team as we're getting ready to go into the G League without an interpreter, without coach. And I was ready for it. And we played 2 games. We won the first game. The second game, we lost in a tight game to a Korean team. And afterwards, I got a call from the owner. And guess what? He fired me. So I called coach up. I said, coach, guess what happened? He says, you don't have to tell me he fired you, right? I said, yeah, he did. He said, coach, and we laughed after that one. He said, he called it before it happened. He said, you got to be wary of that guy. But what a great memory just for him to ask me to be his assistant and to hang out with him. We were having lunch and dinner every day for about, 6 weeks as we were getting these guys ready. And those memories will always be in my heart. And, I can laugh about that those experiences.
Why do you need an interpreter when there are just X and O's on a board? You know,
That's because that Princeton offense was complex, Mr. Kornheiser.
Anyway, Brian, so nice of you to jump on with us, and a tribute to Coach Carril.
Love that man. Saddened by his loss, and it's always great to talk to you and Fred. So, thank you guys for asking me to say a few words about the great man that he was.
Well, we want to thank Brian and also thank Cade Metz for joining us once again. Thank you to our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO, and more information is available at motoetf.com. Technical support is provided by CARTS, the Corporation for Automated Road Transportation Safety, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to safe and high-quality mobility for all. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. You can get your smart speaker to play us too. You can find my tech reports at techstination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Alan Kornhauser. Thank you for listening or watching. Please stay safe.
Thank you. Have a great day.